Well, good morning, everyone, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the US presidential election show. The special show, of course, the results version, or at least we hope we're going to get some clues in the next hour or so as to who is winning the US election. So welcome, everyone. And in particular, welcome to our team of experts from across Europe and the world, in particular colleagues from Berlin, Brussels, Lisbon, London, and Paris. We're going to be hearing from them all in the coming hour as to their take on the latest analysis as to who is winning and what it will all mean for Europe and the world. So first of all, I want to thank Ryan, who's been going through the night, so you don't have to, looking at the latest results that have come through. Over to you, Ryan, to give us an update.
Well, here we are at 7 a.m. and things are still not very clear at all, really. What the story of the night has really been telling us is that Trump has performed better than expected. He hasn't won any state that he wasn't supposed to win, but in places like Ohio and in Florida, he's done better than the polls had given him credit for, which is a deja vu for us who remember 4 years ago. Now, there's a lot of states we're still waiting to hear from. Most of the states where Joe Biden was leading in these tighter states, like Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and so on. So there's a lot more that could happen in this race. But here we are without any clear indication as to who's going to win.
Okay, well, thank you, Ryan. I didn't want to preempt that, but of course, when we all woke up this morning, or those of us who've been watching through the night, it's clearly very early days yet. But we've just watched Joe Biden take to the world's airwaves, looking pretty confident, though. And actually, he did effectively call Arizona, he called Wisconsin, he called Michigan, he called Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He's striking a remarkably upbeat tone, Ryan, given, as you say, it really is perhaps too close to call.
Absolutely. It's too close to call. However, Fox News also called Arizona, much to the unhappiness of the Trump campaign. And with Biden winning Arizona and with everything else that he's won, he would just need to win one of Pennsylvania or Georgia. He could get away with winning Wisconsin and Michigan and still win this race. So it really opens up quite an avenue of possibilities. It's very unlikely that all of the outstanding states, I mean, it's practically an impossibility that all the outstanding states go to Trump, especially since Joe Biden has very healthy leads in Wisconsin and Michigan. Pennsylvania is a bit tighter. North Carolina, as we've seen in the count, is very tight. And in Georgia, even the New York Times has conceded that Biden has a 63% chance of winning there. So he has reason to be confident. Perhaps he also has reason to be sounding confident, but we'll have to see what the results bring out in the next few hours.
Okay, well, thanks, Ryan. If I can perhaps be a bit more forensic now, particularly for the viewers who are just joining us. A lot of this, of course, is speculation. Biden declaring some states that really may not be called, he admitted, for another day or maybe even more, till every vote is counted, as he put it. You're obviously giving us some insight there, particularly from the American national news media, but maybe for the benefit of the viewers watching, what concrete results have we actually got so far? Because at the end of the day, what matters surely is what the voters say in the ballot boxes. What is there on the ground to demonstrate anything that we perhaps didn't think was going to happen? And as you say, anything to confirm the deja vu phenomena from 2016, that Biden is losing his poll edge.
I mean, in terms of, technically, what we're seeing right now are projections from media outlets about who will be carrying the states. We don't yet have any official state certified results.
And they're based on county level results, Ryan, just to get it clear.
These will be based on county level results. Exactly. But what we do know concretely is how the candidates have been performing in some key demographics. And a lot of the headlines following the election will focus on Florida, in particular, a county known as Miami-Dade County, where the Democrats are supposed to be racking up a high number of votes that would have given the platform to challenge the state. Now, the Latino vote in that county was a massive letdown for Joe Biden's campaign. It's a demographic that Hillary Clinton won very handily. It's a demographic Joe Biden has won, but by a lot less than Hillary Clinton did. Some numbers I saw, Hillary won that demographic by 40 points, Biden's won it by 5. So you can see a clear swing towards Trump. Now, many of whom were seemingly susceptible to the attack against Joe Biden, that he's being really driven by a socialist Democratic Party. And they were quite vulnerable to that attack line. And what we're seeing is that potentially weakness in the Latin American vote may have also been seen in Texas. But if Arizona and Nevada go towards Biden, it's going to be a much more complex picture than just a weak performance in that demographic.
And of course, as you say, it's dangerous to perhaps extrapolate from one county, albeit an important one in Florida. And of course, the Hispanic community across America is very, very diverse. And presumably, we shouldn't attach too much weight. A lot of euphoria, a lot of excitement around the success of the Trump campaign in Florida, but perhaps we shouldn't attach too much weight on that, Ryan. Would that be a fair assessment? I think that the mantra has always been, perhaps don't get too sucked in by the early results and the early trends, because at this stage, I remember 4 years ago, there were some very clear signs that Hillary was actually doing well. I recall the exit polls, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth pointing out that 4 years ago, Hillary had long conceded the election to Trump. So the fact that we're here is a testament to the fact that Joe Biden's just more competitive across the board. But yes, I think Florida was always going to be more of an uphill battle than other battleground states for Joe Biden. And going into the weekend, last weekend, his campaign was quite worried about the fact that the fact that it was a tight race was slipping, and that Trump was expanding his lead, which is what we've seen in effect this evening. A pretty comfortable win for Trump in the end, which is closer to what the polls were showing ahead of the weekend. Now, the Biden campaign thought they had stopped the bleeding. Apparently, they had not. But from the very beginning, they were saying that Florida was not on their map or their path to victory. So it would have been a cherry on top, in effect, for their campaign. Whereas for the Trump campaign, Florida was make or break, no mistake about it. And many of the races that are outstanding are equally make or break for the Trump campaign as well. So it's a lot yet to happen. Florida is really the first key sign of how the race is really going. Arizona might be the next. So there's a lot more to come.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ryan, the in-house politics expert at LP Brussels. We've got a team of experts from across Europe and the world gathered for you this morning from the Brussels group, but also from Luther Pendragon in London. It's going to be great to get the views from national capitals to see how they view the race so far, but also what it means to their country, but to Europe and the world for the next 4 years. So it's an absolute pleasure to welcome to the program Florian van Gierke from Berlin. Florian, would you like to join us and perhaps give us the overnight view from Berlin on the results so far? What's your take on it all? Any agreement there with Ryan? It's just simply too early.
Complete agreement, actually. I think it's way too early to say anything. I think we're a little further along than we were last year. I remember 4 years ago, I remember being in, I think it was the Hamburg State Representation here in Berlin back then. They had organized an event for the election, and I think we left at 3 or 4 a.m. and were distraught about what was about to come. That said, I went to bed about 2.5 hours ago for at least a couple of hours of shut-eye. And was about to say, look, this is over. Trump is going to win this thing. But I think what's really interesting this time around is that we've seen in the past, if the results came back, that was pretty much uniform about early voting, on-day voting. It was pretty much the same, and there was no difference in which party was being voted at which time. Republicans and Democrats voted early, approximately the same amount of times as they voted on the same day. This year, basically, you could do a coin toss. If you counted the votes in the first half an hour, you got only Democrats, like nearly 100%, because it was all early voting, and then a few hours later, you got a bunch of only Republicans because it was only the same day. Essentially breaking across party lines also in terms of how strongly you believe that COVID was a problem or is a problem. And I think from what I saw in the exit polls, Democrats are really, really hopeful that more college-educated people were voting and less white people were voting. Whereas a percentage of the voting populace, it was more college-educated and less white. Because those numbers obviously favor Democrats by and large. Though, as you mentioned for Florida, maybe even the opposite is true. That the Cubans and the Venezuelans, they kind of like Trump's harsh course against the authoritarian leaders in those countries, and which sounds a little weird from I think from a European perspective to say that people like Trump's course against authoritarian leaders, because then what is he himself? But that's going to be really interesting. And I agree with you that Florida wasn't critical to Biden's path to victory. It would have been really, really nice to just seal this thing off at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. for us Europeans, and not at 8, 9, 10 a.m. the next day.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a long day. And,
yes.
and Florian, obviously you're very much giving us a view from Germany, because you, as I understand it, are a US citizen as well, and you've actually just voted in this election. You from what you're just saying there, I think we can probably fairly assess that you still think, despite it's going to be a long haul and there's obviously always a margin for error, you still sound pretty confident that Biden will do it.
Well, as I said, when I went to bed earlier, I was not that sure. I actually was about to call it for Trump. Okay. It seems to me that in the past 3 hours, there's been sort of a realization about which votes are outstanding, are still having to be counted, so that even in states where at this instance Trump is leading in the count, he hasn't that many votes to gain still. So we're waiting for, I think in Virginia, for example, we're still waiting on Richmond. In Pennsylvania, we're still waiting on Philly. And those are all population hubs that are going to go overwhelmingly for Biden. And I think that's going to be critical here. Similarly, in Arizona, that's my understanding. And the Trump campaign is basically doing a split, right? For Arizona, they're saying, count all the votes before calling it. And in Pennsylvania, they're saying, don't count all the votes, call it immediately. Because that's basically where Trump's tweet about they're stealing the election, which, by the way, is so purposely dangerous, because his supporters will believe anything he says, and it's basically building up for a coup d'etat, effectively, in a few hours or days or weeks.
Strong words there from Berlin.
Well, just in terms of, let's say, if you remember a few weeks ago where he was saying, calling out to the Proud Boys, saying they need to prepare, right? This is effectively just another building block in saying, look, this could come to a point where where people are going to resist, whatever that means. I'm not going to say that there's going to be armed revolution or anything like that. I hate people who say, look, the US isn't a democracy anymore. It is a democracy, and it's a democratic system. There's no two ways about that. We're having elections. The test is going to be whether we have a peaceful transition of power, also within the populace, the electoral.
Just we bring Ryan back in as well and give perhaps comment on the views that you've outlined. But just before we move back to Ryan to perhaps comment on what you've said, just in terms of the German national position, the government's position, Angela Merkel's position. I mean, it's no secret that Merkel and Trump haven't exactly been best buddies for the last 4 years. And one example, I think, is the decision by Donald Trump to remove troops from German soil, really without any consultation with the German Chancellor. But I think there were many other acts of defiance, discourtesy or simply very polarized political positions, particularly, for example, on Russia. Is obviously Merkel's got to be the ultimate, which she is the ultimate diplomat and keeps her views to herself. But I guess to sum up the German national position, the German government position, I guess they are personally at least rooting for Biden. Would that be a fair assessment, or is it more complex than that?
I think that's exactly right. I think if you ask anybody here in government, they're absolutely rooting for Biden. Now they won't publicly admit that. And obviously, if you ask Trump, he's going to say that he's very good friends with Angela, right? And you remember the story about him giving her candy at a NATO summit and saying, "Well, don't ever say I didn't give you anything." He thinks he's, I think, best buddies with her. But no, obviously, Merkel would love for Biden to win. That said, I think there is a view here in Germany as well that regardless of who wins, Trump moving troops out of Germany, yes. The switch over to Poland, moving them, for example, to Poland, that's diplomatic faux pas, perhaps, on Trump's part. But the overall shift, taking troops out of Europe, stationing them rather towards Asia, that's nothing new. Obama did that. Biden will do that. There's nothing new, and there's nothing Trump-specific about that. The shift itself, the way he's going about it, is Trump-specific. And that's something that Heiko Maas, our foreign minister, has said as much. Yesterday, he gave an interview saying, regardless of who wins, we need to get used to taking care of our own security as Europeans. Now, does that mean Germany will suddenly pay 2% NATO target? I don't think so. But we're going to go about counting those 2% in a very creative way, including things like development spending and foreign aid. And we'll come to something around 2% probably at some point, and then say that we're doing our part. Biden will ask just as much that Germany pay up. That's nothing, I think, that's too Trump specific. Trump just says it in a much more obvious way.
Well, thank you for that, Florian, that insight from Germany. But then actually security will be an important factor in terms of how Europeans react to the outcome, whatever it is. Hopefully you can stay on the show for a little bit longer if possible. If not, we completely understand. You've probably got a very busy day ahead of you. But we're going to bring in Adam Thomas from Luther Pendragon in London very shortly. But first of all, Ryan, do you want to just react to the comments that Florian made there, particularly on really, I guess, how Europe and how Germany in particular would react to a potential Trump second term?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I agree 100% on the fact that there are still some tensions that even a Joe Biden presidency would keep pushing the European countries on with regards to NATO spending. It is tough to point, however, to any tangible success that this Trump rhetoric has achieved. And whether a Joe Biden approach could be different, less aggressive, more consensus building. But it's also from my perspective, and if Florian would disagree with me, I would be curious to hear that with the German election coming up, how much time a U.S. president wants to invest in redeveloping this Merkel partnership would be quite, for me, interesting to see. Especially as there's no candidate right now to replace Angela Merkel in those elections. So on top of the fact that Joe Biden will have a lot of domestic issues to deal with and that foreign affairs may take a back seat for the time being, he may need to manage his time quite carefully with regards to other foreign leaders.
Perhaps we'll come back to that, but we'll welcome Adam to the show. Welcome, Adam, to the US presidential election show. Good morning to you from London.
Good morning, Mark. Good morning, Ryan.
Great
Good morning, Florian.
Great to see you. How was London this morning?
It's still pretty dark here in South London. I've had a little bit of sleep, and then I've been kind of following the results, and it's your last free day before back to lockdown, I believe. We are going back into a national lockdown. Yeah.
But we'll come back to you in a minute, Adam. We're just going to let Florian have a reply, perhaps to what Ryan has just said, and we'll come over to you immediately, Adam. Florian, would you like a comment on what Ryan just said?
Just one real quick thing. I think Biden will have a much easier time picking up because Obama had such a good relationship with Merkel. And I assume that Biden will be able to pick up that conversation and that path. And I think between the Biden team and the German government, and I think the EU governments overall, with the member states and also the Commission, there's going to be much more connections there. I think, to paraphrase Kissinger, although he says he never said it, they know which number to call. I think with Trump, that's always been an issue. Nobody knew who to call. You had the Richard Grenell, but who knows what he had to say, and nobody liked him here. I was in conversations with people from the economy ministry, and they frankly thought he was the most undiplomatic diplomat to ever sit in the U.S. embassy here.
Okay, well, Florian, thank you so much. Hopefully you can stay on if you want to. We're very welcome to stay on and comment further. Always good to hear the views from Berlin, quite strong views, perhaps not surprising. Maybe a different tone in London this morning, Adam, mixed views about whether Trump maybe could hang on for a second term.
Yeah, I think there'll be quite a lot of perhaps nervousness in Downing Street this morning, given some of the results coming in and the continued uncertainty, particularly given the relationship that Boris has had. Has been slightly different to some of the leaders in the EU. So they'll be keeping their powder dry, I think, this morning and following the results very closely indeed. The last few weeks has certainly been, I think, many ministers have been trying to build some of those bridges towards the Biden campaign. That has been quite challenging because of the kind of ban that we understand that he's put on some of his team speaking to foreign governments. But there was clearly a desire from the UK government to try and very quickly build some bridges with the team. So we had Dominic Raab go over in October to meet Senator Chris Coons, who may well be Biden's new Secretary of State. Ryan will know more about that than I will, but trying to build some relationships with the House and the congressional Democrats to try and forge some links. But clearly, there is a nuanced relationship that Downing Street and, dare I say, the Vote Leave team has with the Trump administration. So there'll be some interesting thinking going on, no doubt, this morning.
We'll come to you on really your latest assessment of the results so far. But first of all, we like on these shows to do a bit of a deep dive into some of the issues, because a lot of people deal with the headlines and the day-to-day story. But how do we get to this point, Adam, where you've got such a polarized view between Berlin, which has been the UK's ally now for many, many decades, politically, militarily, one could even argue culturally, real divergence of view, where Berlin, perhaps privately, not publicly, going big time for Biden and wanting Biden. And you've got London there, and to be fair, probably a lot of UK citizens as well, really rooting for Trump. How do we reach that state of affairs where there is such a political polarization in a relatively small continent? What are your thoughts on that?
Wow, that's a pretty massive question for half six in the morning.
You might want some more coffee before you answer that.
Yeah, indeed. Look, I'm not so sure actually that the UK. The UK residents actually the UK voters actually are that supportive of Trump. There was actually quite an interesting study done this week to see if any UK parliamentary constituency would have voted for Trump, and no real constituency came anywhere close to supporting it. And I think Boris knows that, but obviously Boris has built this semi, I would say, populist platform, very akin to some of the ways that President Trump has worked, and clearly, obviously, now the issue is, particularly if Biden wins, I think, how Boris can win some trust with the new administration on the negotiations with the European Union. That's been a massive. That's going to be, I think, a massive issue over the next few weeks of whether the Johnson administration can prove to the new Biden administration that they're not out to wreck the Good Friday Agreement. We obviously have a very controversial piece of legislation currently going through the UK Parliament, the Internal Market Bill at the moment, which has proved very controversial in the US, and already I think a lot of congressional members on the Democratic side have been highly critical of the government's approach there, which is, I think, kind of why Rob kind of went out to the US earlier to try and build some bridges over those kind of issues, because I think kind of that's going to be quite a big, serious issue that that Downing Street is going to need to sort out pretty quickly if Biden wins.
Well, thank you for that, Adam. Perhaps going to the results so far. I mean, you know, you're a veteran politics watcher in the UK, Europe, and the world. You've sat through many an election night. It's actually feeling a bit like a UK. Some of the UK elections we've had, which have been quite close and surprising, perhaps some of them. Maybe not the last one, but certainly the previous one. I mean,
that's what was a lot more straightforward, indeed.
Yeah, you know, is there a bit of deja vu? I'm sure you sat through 2016, or do you think, you know, taking the cautious views of Ryan and Florian, really, it is just still too early to tell?
I think so. As Ryan says, and as Florian said, we're still waiting for a lot of, you know, although Trump looks like he's ahead in some of these key swing states, actually we're waiting for a lot of these city polls to come in. So I kind of just think it's way too early yet to kind of call it either way. To be honest, I think we're going to be looking in even days ahead. It sounds like to get a final result, and actually that's quite problematic, I think, for many kind of foreign governments, including the UK government, about how they're actually going to react to this over the days ahead. You know, and particularly from a UK perspective, because the special relationship is so critical has always been critical to the UK, but is particularly critical to this Boris administration. You know, you were talking earlier, Mark, about our slightly fractured relationships with certain partners in the European Union, and actually Boris's plan is very much to turn to the US to look for, you know, alliances and to develop the UK's new global, I guess, persona that he is. You know, he's got this global Britain mantra, and the US is really important to that agenda, most specifically in trade, of course, but there are other things coming up next year as well, where Boris will look to harness his relationship with the US as perhaps we turn our attention away from the European Union. So if there's any uncertainty, long-term uncertainty, then that causes, I think, the UK government some quite significant problems, given where we're heading in the months ahead, not just with the EU negotiations, but obviously kind of dealing with a major global pandemic as well.
Well, indeed. I mean, we're less than 2 months away until the end of the transition period in terms of leaving the EU, and of course we are in the middle of this terrible pandemic. Perhaps we can turn to that, Adam. I mean, we don't really have politics as usual. I mean, can we actually project forward anything at the moment? I mean, we almost have a socialist government, you could argue, in the UK. In terms of the amount of government spending we have now. They've just extended the furlough scheme. We're about to go into one of the most draconian national lockdowns that the UK has witnessed since the Second World War. You know, bearing in mind there was already one lockdown, massive state intervention in terms of propping up, for example, the railways, which have basically been, you know, you could argue renationalised. Whoever takes over in the White House, surely we're not going to get back to politics as usual in the UK, and perhaps you know, we're going to see a very different and maybe difficult 4 years ahead of us, irrespective of the Brexit issue.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the UK has got some significant challenges ahead of it. There's obviously, as you're saying, we're going into another lockdown. That's ostensibly, I guess, until the 2nd of December, but we don't really know what's going to happen following that. You know, one of the big criticisms of the government is it doesn't really have an exit plan for our COVID lockdown. And in the weeks ahead, we're kind of waiting with bated breath to see what the negotiators can come back on the EU side as well. So economically, it's been very destabilizing in the UK. As you say, Mark, at the moment, the Chancellor is pumping billions of pounds into the economy to try and keep people in work, to try and keep the economy stabilized. But again, given the importance of the US economically to the UK, again, if there's uncertainty off the back of this election, COVID, leaving the EU, economic uncertainty are some pretty major challenges for the Johnson government going forward.
Indeed, so some challenging times ahead, irrespective really of the outcome over the next few days, and some real challenges for businesses across Europe and the world to try and navigate all that. And perhaps we'll come back to that, and you, Adam, if you can stay on. But we appreciate it's a very, very busy morning. Well, we've heard from Brussels, we've heard from Berlin, we've heard from London. It's absolute great that we're going to be hearing soon from Paris, from Paul Damacourt, from Lighthouse Europe. Welcome. Good morning, Paul. Welcome to the show.
Hi, bonjour from Paris. How are you?
Well, you may have been, I'm sure, following the results overnight, following Ryan's analysis. It's looking perhaps tighter than perhaps people thought. It's certainly looking too early. That's the view, I think, so far of our panel. What's the view from Paris? Do you share that view, Paul, that this is looking like it's going to be a long day or two before we have really any good solid indications as to who's going to win?
Yes, definitely. The indication that there's been some debate. People following the main newspapers are following closely with the correspondents based in LA, which have been taken over. And with the excitement, people have already started tweeting a little bit. But there's a sort of uncertainty which had already been there even before the elections. As you might remember, President Trump was received by Macron at several times, either for private dinner at the Eiffel Tower, but also on the Champs-Élysées for the National Day on the 14th of July. There's been several attempts to get a better approach, and on the longer term, what seemed to be a respectful relationship on the longer term got a bit, I don't know, I wouldn't judge it completely, but it was not all with all the results which were intended, and so there's been a lot of expectations on those elections, and at the same time, sort of anticipation on the fact that the election on both sides would be very, very difficult, and that the result might be a tie or very close tie, and we're getting close to that. So it's interesting to see that those analyses which have started early on are sort of appearing now.
Okay, well, thank you for that reaction, Paul. If we can perhaps do a deep dive into the French position, we explored the German position and the London position, where, again, probably unfairly characterizing Florian's analysis, but, Germany really hoping for a change in administration for the sake of stability and security. This is a paraphrasing what you say, but it's probably privately a lot of officials in Berlin hoping Biden would have won by now. They may have to wait a little bit longer for that. And London, a more nuanced view, shall we say, Adam, because of Brexit in particular, but for other reasons. Prime Minister Boris Johnson in particular, looking to go for global Britain, and therefore strengthening relations with the Trump White House would be very much probably his preference overall. But there are, important caveats there, which Adam explained. In Paris, Paul, is there a clear political favourite privately for politicians at the Elysee Palace?
It's a good question. Diplomatically, people would not answer that. However, if you take the issues which seem to be which have risen during the last years, there's been the position of US in Iran. There's the financing of NATO, which is an issue which has risen during the last years. Also, the question of the taxation of digital giants. Financial Minister Le Maire has been very vocal on it and wants really to move forward on it. Whatever happens, discussions have been at OECD level. However, they have not advanced, and so France has indicated that they want to move forward on it. So I guess that so publicly everyone would say, well, the best wins, and it's the biggest democracy in the world, and it's our first commercial exchange partner. However, there are some elements which would favor an election of Biden and of the Democrats, even though some of those issues will not be answered to, especially the issues linked to trade and taxation on digital. But if I had a wild guess, and on the exchange I've had informally, it would be lean more towards Biden. And please not forget that Macron, when he got elected, was very inspired by the election of Obama. So it's an environment he really it's an environment he really him and his team appreciate.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Paul. And as you say, the French diplomacy means that France will obviously work with whoever prevails at the end of the day. But interesting to hear what the background thinking is. In terms of the French situation in a practical sense, and how businesses are going to navigate all this, we've been hearing how complicated the world has become. It's going to get a lot more complicated, but also an incredibly difficult economic situation and the security situation now in France. The pandemic appears to be creating a lot of difficulties there, really deep into a second wave, and I think record numbers of infections. You've had security issues, of course. Tragically, a number of people have been killed. This must be a very difficult time for business. You've got a lot of challenges, be it the pandemic, terrorism, now political uncertainty. I mean, how are businesses viewing the year ahead? It must be tough for them.
It's been hard for the last several years. There's been first the Gilets jaunes, which has created havoc in part of the country. Then, of course, the COVID situation, which makes it very difficult. Several reasons. One of them is, of course, there's a shock in the country was already quite indebted. Not the most indebted in Europe, but with a debt, and it just creates more debt and a difficulty compared to Germany, for instance, to have relaunch plans with private money. So that's one of the issues. Second of all, it's the climate of confidence that is given to France. It seems very difficult to do business. And the total lockdown of all businesses for the moment is creating exactly now a mini debate on the fact that the value actually of what is done for the moment is actually given to American platforms, closing down all shops, libraries, everything here actually promotes Amazon, which is part of the public debate for the moment, and it's an issue which companies should deal with very early on, because we're entering into re-election in France soon, and in 2022. But next year will be linked to that, and I guess the French voice can be heard at European level, with France taking the presidency of the Council in beginning of first semester 2022. So those issues have to be addressed very quickly.
Indeed, so a very challenging time for French businesses, and it does sound like a very difficult situation actually on the ground there, with a lot of business and shop and factory closures. Perhaps we can bring in other panelists to react to your remarks, and maybe Ryan to give us an update. I know you've been following the Twitter feeds and the news alert on the latest situation. But perhaps we can just turn to the issue whilst Ryan's going to be working on the update, just to another issue that I think is going to be top of Europe's agenda for the next 4 years, and that is climate change and implementing the Paris Accord and reaching not just that 2050 target, but the 2030 target, of course, at least 55% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. How does the election, Florian, do you think affect all that? Or we had a discussion yesterday with Ryan about Timmermans really ploughing on irrespective of the outcome. But clearly the Green Deal will be bolstered by a Biden win. Big implications for business, big implications for our economy, big implications obviously for the environment. So what's the view from Berlin really on the Green Deal and relations with the White House?
Yeah, well, I think that there's two parts there. I remember a discussion yesterday, I think at 8 p.m. or something, there was a discussion by Atlantikbrücke, I believe it was, and the AmCham, and they were doing a big debate on YouTube about what would happen. And the question was asked, could Biden simply walk to Paris and say, hey, I'm going to join again? And I think the answer was, technically, legally speaking, he could, and probably he will. And obviously, yes, the Germans would, and I think the same goes for the French, and I imagine also the British and the EU overall would strongly prefer if he did that, to rejoin the Paris Accord. And I think he would do that as well, too, driven not only by his own desires, but also by the squad, right, by the very sort of left-leaning members of the House. And I heard a rumor yesterday that there may be some discussion about promoting AOC to the Senate somehow by some switcheroo, and then having somebody else become Secretary of State or some ridiculous story like that. But fact is, there is a movement in the Democratic Party going more towards what in Europe would be the Green Party, outside of the US Green Party, obviously. And so I think he will join.
Okay, fascinating. We'll come back to that. I know, Adam, you've probably got a comment on that. We will go back to Paul, but whilst we're thinking about the climate issues, Ryan, do you want to give us a quick update on the tally so far?
Well, you won't be surprised to hear not much has changed. Georgia.
You're not supposed to say that, Ryan.
Yeah, well, I mean, don't get me wrong. I didn't wait up all night for nothing to happen. Georgia seems to have counted more votes, and the New York Times has this needle forecast, which, having seen it throughout the night, I would recommend no one looks at that ever again. It's not great for mental health. But they give Joe Biden a 64% chance of winning Georgia. I haven't seen their Arizona forecast, but it's probably higher than that. If he were to win both those states, he would only need to win one of Wisconsin, Michigan, or Pennsylvania to win the race. And that would put Donald Trump in a very, very tough position, of course. But, we're still waiting for mail-in ballots that could yet change things around. Not to mention, we might be waiting until Friday to get conclusions from the Midwestern states. So I think we may get a result from Georgia sooner, but then we're going to have to wait anyway until the end of the week, I would suspect, to get any definitive results. And then again, you have under this race, you have the Senate race, which looks like the Democrats might just fail at getting the majority there. So that's bad news by itself.
Okay, well, yeah. Thank you for that, Ryan. As you say, some interesting trends, but still nothing definitive. I'm sure you staying up all night will be appreciated by everyone else, even though it may have been frustrating for you. Reaction from London, then we'll go back to Paris with Paul. Particularly, Adam, your comments on the climate agenda. Again, differences perhaps politically between Berlin and London. London very firm, though, on climate change, the Paris Accord, and in particular the 2050 target. How will a change of the White House perhaps affect Britain's climate commitments?
Yeah, we talked earlier about how the UK can build bridges with a new administration. I think climate policy is one of those key areas that Downing Street really feels that it can make some really strong connections to a new Biden administration. And of course, the UK has a major opportunity next year to do that in hosting COP26. And I think Downing Street is very focused on trying to show what will be wanting to show a new Biden administration that this is actually the UK being a global leader. It's about its commitment to multilateralist action, and kind of showing that the UK takes these kind of issues very seriously. So, Downing Street will have seen just how big kind of Biden went on climate change policy during this election. Actually, probably one of the few issues actually got cut through to the UK from the kind of slight pandemonium, I guess, there's been throughout the election period. Actually, that was one of the big issues that did get cut through here, I think. And they will really want to show that new administration that the UK takes its climate change commitments seriously, but is showing that that global leadership, and so COP26 will be a key moment, as will before that the G7 meeting too, where I'm sure those kind of issues where Downing Street knows it can build those bridges and prove to Biden that Boris is not perhaps the kind of mini Trump that perhaps some people in his team think he is, to show him that there's a slightly that the UK is, the administration is slightly different to perhaps what the perception is of some people in the Biden team.
Well, thank you, Adam, for that view from London. We're going to welcome to the show Henrique Burnay from EU Opportunity from Lisbon, the view from Lisbon. Welcome. Good morning to you, Henrique. We're going to invite Paul to just come back briefly, and then we're going to go over to you, Henrique. Paul, we've covered a lot of ground there, particularly climate change and obviously COP26 coming up in the UK later, and how that is affecting geopolitics, but also business here in Europe, with the Green Deal being such a priority, I'm sure, for member states, particularly France, looking ahead to your presidency in 2022. Is it going to make a difference to delivering the Green Deal in Europe, in France, whatever the outcome?
Well, very briefly, I think it's been a priority, and it will stay a priority for France. There'll be pressure put to have this Green Deal move forward, and especially the objectives of the COP and climate targets are not even part of the debate. They're accepted for the moment, and I think it's in something on which France will be very, very, very firm and will want to advance vigorously, probably on it as soon as 2021, 2022.
Well, thank you for that, Paul. Just to also, for our viewers' benefit, just to thank everyone so far been giving their views. We've had the views from Brussels, Berlin, London, and Paris. It's now great to hear the Portuguese view from Henrique Burnay. I'm not sure whether, like Ryan, you've been up through the night and obviously feeling a bit tired and frustrated this morning with the lack of clear results so far, but maybe that's an indication that it is going to be quite close. What's your assessment, Henrique, this morning?
Well, good morning. Actually, I did go to bed at some point, and I think we all, well, at least from my side, when Florida didn't flip, I think we all got the picture that things weren't moving in the direction people were thinking initially, and I think that was the first signal. And at this stage, to be honest, I'm still watching all the news and all that, but I'm very much getting convinced that you will probably have 4 more years of Trump. And to assess that, and I think that's the thing, because I think we've all been imagining how was it going to be 4 years of Biden, or a Biden presidency would look like, and the relations with the EU. And I think there hasn't been much thought about how would a second Trump presidency look like in what regards relations with the EU. And I think we better start considering that possibility. And I think there are a few trends that we should look at. And one of those is that the drift going on between the EU and the US will have wider public support. And I think that's important to understand, because there is a decreasing support for the Atlantic tide and for the Atlantic bond. And so I think that will allow for some policies in the EU to take place that are more aggressive, so to speak, or more divisive towards the US. And I think there are 2 or 3 areas where you'll see that. One is when it comes to trade. Secondly is when it comes, and this is very much, I would say it's very much the agenda of the French Commissioner Breton. So when it comes to defense, when it comes to tech, and when it comes to the idea that you should have some kind of strategic autonomy, European economic autonomy, and digital sovereignty towards the rest of the world, and that usually means China, of course, but mostly regarding the US. And I think we're going to watch some proposals that could have some resistance from those that are more pro-Atlanticists. Will have a harder time to resist to that. I think that's probably the major political change.
Okay, well, pretty profound analysis there. I mean, one, obviously, you think Trump will prevail, but secondly, the implications that has on European policy, boosting the drift, ironically, perhaps towards European sovereignty, not just militarily but economically as well. And this is a trend, as you say, and as you know, Henrik, we've seen over the last 4 years, greater European autonomy. In many ways, greater European unity as a reaction to the Trump administration. Looking ahead, of course, the Portuguese will play a key role in all of this. You'll assume the presidency pretty soon, I believe.
Yes. The next semester, so starting January, is the Portuguese presidency. So that's when it's the inauguration, whomever is the president. And I'm saying, I don't know if it's Trump or Biden, like no one knows. But what I think is the chances that it's Trump are much bigger now than they were 24 hours ago. So I think we should start looking at that possibility in a different way as we were looking before. And for the Portuguese presidency, I mean, the Portuguese have a problem, or have several problems that we need to find out how they will be resolved. So will there be a budget agreement before the Portuguese presidency or not? Will there be an agreement regarding the bazooka? So next to the budget, the Recovery and Resilience Plan as well. Will there be an agreement regarding Brexit? And now, what kind of relation with the US? And the Portuguese will inaugurate this relation. If it were Biden, I think it would be an opportunity to re-inaugurate a closer relation with the US. If it's not Biden, I don't think it's not that Portugal has a hard relation with Trump. There were no problems, but there's nothing very close, and there's nothing like to celebrate or to restart. Awkwardly, I think that the role that the UK can play might be very relevant, because the current British government might be the best bridge between the US and Europe, and that might make the whole thing. And it seems that Brexit may end up well or with a deal, and that may make the UK government relevant for this bridge.
Well, very, very interesting. Well, we'll bring Adam back in there, if we may, on the UK acting as potentially a bridge to a Trump second-term administration. Ironically, perhaps the UK playing the peace broker between its European partners and the US at this this crucial time. Of course, the UK-Portuguese alliance is one of the world's oldest alliances, so we're always going to see a very close alignment, I think, between Lisbon and London. Adam, your reaction to Henrique's analysis there, that the UK could play a key role in the next 4 years, given the geopolitical challenges we face?
Yeah, I think kind of if we do see a Trump administration, yes, it puts the UK in quite an interesting position, potentially, given that the links that the UK government already has with the administration, as Henrique said, that potentially that we can act as this bridge. Because I think, although we've left the European Union, I think the UK government would still say it's very much committed to a range of different international organisations that bring the US and the EU together. We've talked a lot about NATO this morning. But again, there's arguments around the potential of the G7 looking to formulate new alliances as a counterweight to China. And again, I think the kind of UK government wants to play a big role in that too. And certainly, if Trump carried on, then I think that's probably one of the big bonuses for the UK, in the sense that there would continue, I would have thought, to be momentum around the trade discussions that we're having. We finished round 5 of the negotiation this week. And so there would be perhaps a bit more momentum there. And I think, again, that, you know, the UK would want to sell that as a bridge. I think probably there are still a number of headaches, though, for the UK government, even if Trump wins. We've talked about kind of climate change and where the UK wants to show some leadership there. I think that would be a problem. And I think also if Trump decides that he's going to become even more, or make the US even more insular in his second term, I think actually that poses some quite significant challenges for the UK about then how it manages that situation. If, say, for example, he puts a lot of pressure on the UK to side with some of his views around NATO, if he puts a lot of pressure on the UK around things like the Iran deal and Middle Eastern policy, then I think that's going to cause quite a lot of headaches for the UK as it tries to balance its relationship both with the US and continuing to have a constructive relationship with its European partners.
Well, thank you, Adam, for that view from London. We've got just a few minutes of the show left, so maybe just 30 seconds or so final words from everyone, and we'll end up with Ryan with his latest analysis of the results so far. But if you're running a business, you're running corporate affairs, public affairs, I mean, how do you navigate these unprecedentedly challenging times, changing times in the year ahead, bearing in mind the uncertainty we've got tonight, the pandemic, the economics, the geopolitics, everything else? Paul, the view from Paris, your advice to business leaders on navigating a challenging year ahead?
Please make your voice heard at an early stage. French are not as well known as other countries for the lobbying. It's at an early stage. Say what is your issue? Why are you impacted? What change can be made? What are you looking for? There's going to be an economic stimulus package. There's a multi-annual framework. There's a big cake which is there, but not big enough for everyone. So fight early in advance, say what you want, and you might have a piece of it. And this will help you stay afloat for the years to come.
Well, thank you for that very clear advice, Paul. Almost you're saying, despite the uncertainty, maybe because of it, businesses shouldn't hold back. They should tell policymakers what they want.
Yep.
Over to Lisbon, Henrique, Burnay, your views on how businesses should navigate these difficult, challenging times.
Well, I totally agree with Paul. The thing is, if you're if you're an American business, you need to be in Brussels engaging directly with the EU policymakers, because it's not the good relation between the EU and the American administration that is going to help you. On the other hand, and again, if you're an American business, you should pay attention to the fact that these bonds, this transatlantic bond, is weaker now. So you need to put forward your arguments. If you're an European company, well, there is room now for more of these European autonomy and distancing. So you need to make your voice heard. That's obviously the big issue. I think the big change is that I think EU was thinking, well, things will go away and things will change. Well, with 4 more years of Trump, if that's the thing, it won't go away. So there will be more drift, and there will be need for more policy making and for policy influencing in Brussels.
Well, thank you, Henry. Really appreciate those comments. And perhaps we'll go over to Berlin, to Florian, the view from Germany. I mean, how can businesses cope with all the changes, the challenges? Is your advice too that they can't wait? They need to put their head above the parapet. They need to tell policymakers in Berlin, in Brussels, elsewhere, what they want.
What they want, what they need, and what they stand for. I think the last part is really important. Companies are, at the end of the day, they're political. They're not going to be it's not just a market system where they operate in a vacuum. They're actors that also influence policy in both directions. Because at the end of the day, they employ people and they pay taxes. So they need to formulate what they want, what they need. As a lot of companies in the US ahead of the elections have done, advocating for voting, for democracy. I think that's something that will have to happen here as well. Also, as Paul said, with regards to who gets what part of the stimulus packages, but also attaching that to questions of values and policy, not just in an evil lobbying way, but in a constructive sort of pro-democracy way.
Well, thank you, Florian, for that. And I think it's an incredibly important point about, as you say, that companies are political, and they need to perhaps recognise that they need to act in a more political way, albeit maybe in many cases with a small p. Quick word from London, and then we'll go on to Brussels for the final word. The latest view from London. You've been on the show with us for much of the time. Final thoughts, Adam, but also how businesses can cope with a very challenging year ahead.
Yeah, I mean, from a UK perspective, we're, as we've said, the UK is at a massive crossroads point on a number of issues, as guys have said on the call. In the UK, it's a very similar situation. The kind of the support coming out of COVID is not going to be shared out fairly. It's going to be shared out to the people who make their case the loudest, the strongest, as to why they need that. That's exactly the same in the UK. And obviously from our perspective now, we've been talking about the EU negotiations, but some of the critical things happening now in the UK is that the government is really starting to think very seriously as it takes the powers back from the EU, particularly over things like regulation. So we've seen a huge amount of information coming out of the UK Treasury over the last few weeks about wanting to work with industry to develop some of these core regulatory systems that now the UK has total control over. That's going to be a big issue, and people need to start engaging with that now if they're going to have an influence on it. And of course, the other big thing that now the UK is doing is these trade negotiations. We've done the deal with Japan, but now there is a real focus inside government on some of those other, particularly on the Pacific side, the Asia Pacific side, a real focus on those trade negotiations. And again, if businesses aren't part of those discussions and getting really involved in that now, they're potentially going to miss some key opportunities to work with the UK government around those issues too. So it's an uncertain time, but in terms of engaging with government in the UK, it's actually really quite an exciting time as the UK starts to develop some of these policy platforms that it really hasn't had to look at for many decades.
Well, thank you, Adam, for that. As you say, challenges ahead, but lots of opportunities too for those businesses that do speak out and get engaged, particularly in the trade area, but also, as you say, in terms of the help for companies in relation to the pandemic. We'll move over to Ryan Hunter for the final word. I mean, just a quick word, Ryan, on how businesses navigate all this in Brussels, but then perhaps a final update on where we stand with the election. And as always, Ryan, you won't get away with not giving us your latest prediction. So over to you, Ryan.
Well, I agree with what everyone's been saying. And for the immediate future, it's just having patience, really. I mean, jumping the gun on either candidate winning at the moment seems a bit rushed, just with what's not been reported yet. And also just to point out that the outcome of the US election is not going to impact what the EU does or does not do. The EU has lots changed in 4 years. And if you're an American business and you assume that the EU will go back to the way it was 4 years ago under an Obama presidency, you're fooling yourself. The EU has tried to push for more autonomy. And it's pushing for things that are going to happen regardless of who wins the election, such as your digital tax. A lot of the Green Deal legislation is still going to be pushed, regardless of whether the US is an ally or an opponent in that regard. So I think just being aware of what the EU is doing is going to be hugely important in the months ahead, in particular with the recovery fund, as the other panelists have been saying. Now, shifting to the latest results, I see we had a comment asking for when the next round of results are due, and we're not going to get a round of results as we've been getting throughout the evening. Now it's just about the outstanding states. And I do assume we're going to get results from Maine, from Arizona, and Nevada this evening. All three, I would expect, will go towards Joe Biden. Which will leave us with 5 states left, if you exclude Alaska, which will go for Trump. no doubt about that. 5 states left, which are Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. And there is no scenario in which we will not see ourselves waiting for the Midwest states, which will be very late in counting. So patience, let's not jump the gun, because even with those 5 states left, it could go either way. And in terms of a prediction, if you had to push me, if I'm on the Biden campaign, I'd be fairly confident with how things are looking, and I'm still gonna be leading towards Trump, towards Biden. Sorry.
It's been a long night, Ryan. I think you're forgiven for making the odd laps. You're forgiven for being a little bit sleepy this morning. I think we all are. We're going to be very sleepy, I think, by this time tomorrow too. Just to thank Florian, Adam, Paul, and Henrique, and of course Ryan for joining the US presidential election show this morning. Viewers may have thought this would be our last show. Well, in fact, it's not going to be, because the show must go on, because we've got to cover the counting that is going to go on for a few more days yet before there's a very clear declaration. And I think there's still a lot of information there to analyze as to the result, but also the reactions from national capitals. So maybe some of you may be able to join us on a future show. It's been great hearing the perspectives from Berlin, Brussels, London, Lisbon, and Paris. So thank you for your time. Wish you all well. Take care. And thanks in particular to our viewers for tuning in. And we'll keep you posted on our next special broadcast, which will give you an update on the election results so far. So thanks, everyone, and have a good day.